Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women as ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a public intellectual, a Renaissance man, a philosopher, author, a columnist. He did an undergraduate degree in philosophy and politics at Harvard University, went on to study business management, and has left behind at least 3 case studies used by the Harvard Business School. He returned to India, spent 30 years from being a bicycle salesman to the CEO of Procter & Gamble, a job he gave up to become a writer. He's written several books, 3 plays that have been performed around the world and have been published as an anthology by the Oxford University Press. His most recent books have included The Elephant Paradigm and India Unbound, which have both been published by Penguin and have been international bestsellers. He's got a novel, A Fine Family, which is to be made into a film by Shyam Benegal. As you can see, a man of many parts. As a columnist, he writes for the Times of India and occasionally for the Wall Street Journal. I'm delighted to finally get down to introducing my guest in person, Gurcharan Das. Gurucharan Das, the Guru. You sort of derive your name from that, and you know, you wear the hat of a public intellectual writing for the community and the group. What is your own sense of a guru for you?
Well, you know, I must tell you that the name Guru, my name when I was young was Ashok Kumar, and my grandmother, though, did not think. She suspected that my mother gave me that name because she was in love with the actor Ashok Kumar. So she didn't think that was an appropriate name for her grandson. So she took me to her guru, put me at his feet, and told the guru, "Enu Nadyo." And so the guru looked down and he says, "Well, since you've put him at my feet, let's call him Gurucharan Das."
So was that when the sort of the seeds of this role that you see yourself now as, you know, sort of philosopher, intellectual, writing for the community sort of come up?
Well, I think one thing for sure, the guru probably knew that I needed to be reminded every day to be humble. And so suddenly from the Prince of Happiness, I became a very, you know, Ashok Kumar to humble servant of the feet of the guru. But let me tell you, when I was in the business world, my attitude, the word guru, what it meant for me, stood for guru, good at understanding, but relatively useless.
Well, you use the word good, and I know that you're sort of working to, you know, deliver a lecture on why be good, and this really derives from, you know, one of the many things I couldn't squeeze into the brief introduction was that you're also working on a book on the Mahabharat. So, you know, for a corporate guru to talk about why be good, well, tell us, why be good?
Well, let me first tell you that how I got into this project. My sort of basic university work was in 2 areas. One was moral philosophy, which I studied with Rawls, and the second I also dabbled with a great man called Ingalls in Sanskrit, and with epic in particular. So I'm kind of returning back to those college enthusiasms. At the end of my last book, India Unbound, I concluded, Rajiv, that the prosperity of India now could not be stopped. That we will really turn into a middle-class nation. Maybe not as fast as China, but we will surely. And certainly there are parts of India which will turn middle-class by 2020, and there are parts like Bihar, Eastern UP, Odisha, which will take another generation.
In fact, you predicted that this will happen, you know, quickly enough for us to overtake Europe too.
Well, in fact, I think as a whole economy we will, because the demographics are against Europe. So what I'm trying to say is that, odd as it may seem and astonishing as it may seem, but the prosperity of India really is on autopilot. And if we do more reforms, we'll do it faster. So at the end of my book, I said my feeling that I left with was that now the issue that concerns us all is really governance. The fact that teachers don't show up. I mean, 1 out of 4 teachers in a government school is absent without a proper reason for being absent. And 2 out of 4 teachers are not teaching. And I said that, look, in such a case, normally we look to institutional reform. You know, if you could sack a teacher who did not show up, you would have other teachers showing up. But even if they showed up, you could not ensure that they would actually teach. So there was a moral dimension. And to understand that moral failure is why I decided to go to the Mahabharat. And for the last 3 years, I've really been studying believe it or not, the Mahabharat. I have spent time with Sanskritists. I've been reading it, you know, I have the Pune critical edition, plus I'm using the University of Chicago Press edition in English, because you can't really read it in Sanskrit at this age in your life. But I can go to Sanskrit if I want to check a certain word.
But tell us about this why be good dimension. Do you really believe that the moral imperative to be virtuous, that aspiration is what will transform
I
society?
think it's necessary. And I think some of this fact that I'm talking about, teachers not showing up in schools and beating children, these dimensions are moral dimensions. And through this book, I really would like to have Indians look in the mirror and face the questions that Yudhishthir and Draupadi faced, in the Vana Parvan or in the Sabha Parvan, as to why you have. I mean, Draupadi is asking Yudhishthir, look, here you are the good fellow, and here you are in the forest, sleeping on the earth, while Duryodhan is sleeping on sheets of silk, on down pillows. And so why should you be good? Why not might is right, as Duryodhan believes?
Before we move on, you still haven't told me why one should be good.
Well, I think that the best answer is the answer that Yudhishthir gives. And that is that you have to be good because you have to be good. Now, this sounds odd, but that is really the only justification that when you start giving utilitarian answers or answers about, well, you'll get to heaven if you are good, or if you start giving any extraneous answer that society couldn't function unless you kept promises, he says society will collapse if people lie to each other. So you need norms. But ultimately, the most powerful answer he gives is that you have to be good because that's the only way to be. You don't need a justification. It is an imperative.
We were talking about being good, and you have been a votary of the private sector, of the globalization, of the role that the corporates can play. Have you struggled? Were you struggling when you were with Procter & Gamble and the private sector yourself with this notion of the moral imperative for the private sector? Was the philosopher in you yearning to get out and be free from the structures of pursuing profit for its own sake?
Well, that's too romantic an idea. I was just doing my job, frankly. And the one thing, though, it was pretty clear to me from the beginning was that my salary was not paid by my boss. My salary was paid by the consumer. And so if I was selling Vicks VapoRub, I had to make sure that the label on the bottle was properly put and the ingredients were good and fresh. And otherwise, your competitor will take away the business. And that's the thing about the competitive market, that you don't have to worry about being good. The competitor ensures that you behave well in the market. If you start cheating, if you start claiming in your advertising things that are not correct, you are driven out by the market. My concern, obviously, even in the private sector, there are things when people try to cut corners, etc. But one thing was very clear, that you had to obey the law. I mean, you couldn't get away without that. And that's the mistake a lot of businessmen make.
And seem to get away and survive and apparently thrive.
But Rajiv, I've worked in the private sector, and of course we all observe the public domain. And right now in India, it's really what's concerning us is the public domain. The private sector is kind of on its own, it's delivering in it. We're getting growth, we're getting prosperity. The institutions like SEBI, etc., have improved. What is failing us really is the public domain. And that's where my concerns about right and wrong and good and bad have come, because the day I took early retirement to become a writer in mid-career, and one of the first things we did was to build a house. And building a house at every turn is a nightmare for the ordinary person. You are asked for a bribe, somebody will put a red tape, tie you up in red tape. So I just saw the kind of bad behavior I had never seen in the private sector. You see, you don't see it in the private sector because the customer will drive you out. He can choose between you and your competitor.
So in a sense, this kind of social engineering of becoming good, we talked about in the first segment of the program, how is that likely to happen? How is that transformation going to take place? Particularly, there's, in India there is great concern about issues of equity, about the agriculture sector, about the rural sector, about eradicating poverty. That's sort of the buzzword for the government, because as you said, the private sector is sort of taking care of the middle class and the elites in some ways. But there is this huge segment of India that's getting left behind. Do we just wait for the fact, or that Manmohan Singh as a Prime Minister is seen as an honest man, a man of integrity, and somehow that will permeate down the system?
Well, I think actually, oddly enough, the poor are the biggest victims of bad behavior on the part of government servants. The rich get away, but the poor, you see the rickshaw driver, you see the rediwala, and they have to pay a hafta, they have to bribe, and they are the ones who just get caught. And so actually, for them it's the same thing. I mean, if we had the kind of reforms where we gave people titles to what they own, automatically, I mean, this is Hernando de Soto's classic argument, that if the poor had title to what they have, whether it's a rickshaw or their redi or a little shop or their piece of land, then they can leverage that. So to me, it's really, once again, that markets can help a great deal. And you see, even the poor person, when his father dies, he has a little piece of land, but the patwari makes sure that he gets his pound of flesh before he'll transfer that land to. So
do you feel that this change is possible through legislative initiatives, by doing things like giving the poor titles? Is that enough to? I mean, would you say that in countries where the private sector or private enterprise dominates, like say in the United States, where a lobbyist from the private sector can move in and out of government with great ease, that somehow we get better governance, more moral governance?
No, I'm really focusing on your first question, which is really about the poor and how to get them out of it. The answer for the poor, Rajiv, is not to give them doles, money. In fact, it's probably better to give them money than to give them these work for food programs, food for work programs, etc. But the real answer for the poor is to make our services work and give them titles, as I said. Now, services work means school. If you can just do schooling and health properly.
Yet, ironically, schooling and health are not issues on the political agenda. When politicians go for elections, we're not really talking about schools and health. Why isn't there a demand pull from the electorate for what seems to people like you and me very basic needs?
Yeah. You know, it's a funny thing you say this, because once I met Mr. Advani, and he was telling me he went on his Rath Yatra, and I said, Advaniji, what did people tell you? He said they wanted schools. And I said, well, what did you do about that? And he was silent. And you'd think that today elections should be fought when there's such huge demand for schools. And the fact is, Rajiv, that India now spends 4% of GDP on education. Plus we are paying this education cess. I don't know what it will total up to. But the reality is, it's not the quantity. The left wants us to throw more money. But it's not just the quantity of money. What's betraying us is that school teachers are not showing up in these schools. I mean, I don't know whether you're familiar with the study that came out, that 1 out of 4 teachers is absent, 2 out of 4 teachers are not teaching. This is government primary schools all over India. The best is Maharashtra with 15% absence, and the worst is Bihar and Jharkhand with 41-42% absence. And so when you think about it, that if 2 out of 4 are not teaching, 1 out of 4 is absent, then we are getting only 1% of GDP being effective in education, really. 1% out of 110,000 crores. I mean, we are wasting 80,000 crores from this bad behavior. Now, that's where goodness somehow, I feel, because nobody dares touch the teachers' union, which won't let the teachers be touched. And certainly, they are the invigilators in the schools. I'm not saying all teachers. I mean, there's some wonderful teachers.
Sure.
But this is a statistic.
Gurcharan Das, you were talking about schools, you were talking about education, you were talking about the future of India. The West, the Economist in particular, has long been trying to project India as a sort of, the sleeping tiger, and you have in fact used the paradigm of the elephant. Why the elephant?
Well, I think that, democracy and tradition do hold us back. And in some ways, I think we are willing to pay that price. I mean, I think we'd like our tradition to continue. We'd like democracy to continue. And I don't think at least large parts of India would trade off democracy for 2% higher growth. Now, if you ask me, the people 25% below the poverty line may be willing to make that trade-off, and they should. So I think that the fact is that, look, we've been growing at 6% a year for 25 years. Now, this is an elephant that's on the move. An elephant, a formidable elephant. But still, the pace of reform is so slow.
What about the
painful
qualities of the elephant as opposed to the qualities of the tiger that sort of got you to use the image of an elephant?
You see, the tiger runs out of steam. The elephant, the tiger may have speed, but the elephant has distance. And so I think that's a good way to characterize.
And the elephant meditates, the elephant spends a long time in silence.
Yes, there's a famous Buddhist saying about the elephant who meditates. I think it's the elephant is more what we are as Indians. A diverse country like India has to be the way we are. I think that's why, people have been wondering for 2 generations, how did India become a democracy? Well, that's the only way India could have survived with its diversity. So, when an elephant is also moving the way this one is, with purpose, I just think it's a good image. It's not a negative image.
As someone who's sort of studied philosophy at Harvard, and you have said in some ways that your sort of ideal is the ideal of the Enlightenment in a very Western sense. You're researching the Mahabharat. You're deeply grounded in Indian tradition. You write about it. What is the quality of Indianness that you feel that you have, even as this 18th century Enlightenment holds so much attraction for you?
Well, I'm seeking that, like all of us, and something one has been seeking all one's life, and I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but most of us think that it's our obsession with moksha that makes for Indianness, our belief in the transcendence, and belief in the sort of human perfection to be able to achieve that. My interest, however, is not in moksha. My interest is in dharma. I think we've kind of forgotten in this overlay of moksha that the Indian tradition is very rich in what it can offer dharma, about dharma. And that's really why, I'm interested in using dharma as a way to try to grasp these failures in governance, the day-to-day governance that we were just speaking about. And I kind of think that it's time that not only we, but the West also thinks, that otherworldly country, India. Whereas, frankly, the stuff on dharma is very much this worldly, very much dharma of the king. How the king, in Shanti Parvan, the whole Bhishma's sort of teaching to Yudhishthira after the war is about how a king should behave.
Which, some people would sort of be uncomfortable and think that in a secular democracy, to talk about the notion of dharma as a dominant aspiration is sort of dangerous.
Well, I think we have actually, the word dharma has got degenerated. Dharma doesn't mean religion. Dharma means doing the right thing, being moral, doing right and not doing wrong. Now, where in democracy, in a secular democracy, can't you talk about right and wrong? This has got nothing to do with God. This has got to do with you and I, and if I make a promise to you, I must fulfill the promise. If I shouldn't lie to you, I shouldn't hurt you. Now, that's what dharma really is all about.
You've described secularists as statists, and you have called, in a sense, for the privatization of religion. What do you mean by the privatization of religion?
Well, actually, that was not my word. It was Outlook's headline. My concern, Rajiv, is actually that both the sectarians and the secularists in quotes, have kind of let us down. And that's why we don't respect either. Secularism is the most wonderful idea of tolerance. Ashoka, the greatest emperor who was on this earth, he talked about, and that was his notion of dharma too. So the point I'm just saying is the secularists have let us down because they have created a kind of intolerance of their own. And the reason is that most of them really make you believe that if you are religious, you are really kind of stupid. They don't mean to, but this is how it comes out. And you know, I mean, I was to tell you a little story that when I was reading the Mahabharat, and it was your reaction just now about what you said about Dharma. Somebody, the guys, you know, he said to me, I haven't seen you, and I said, well, you know, I've been reading books and classic ancient books and so on, and I've been reading the Mahabharat. And he said, Acha, Hindutva ban gaya. Now, that was the reaction of this secularist person to my reading the Mahabharat. In a sense, I felt suddenly that I had lost my own tradition. I had lost my own tradition because somebody thought that if I read, it's like you said, oh, you're reading about Dharma, isn't that dangerous in a secular democracy? I mean, how can you give up your own tradition?
I didn't say if you're reading the Dharma, if you're preaching
but
the
even
Dharma as is widely
but
understood and appreciated.
Anyway, the point though is that the environment created, I think the fault is that of the both sides, the sectarians, the RSS and all these people, because of the way they have tried to take over our past. But it's also the fault of the secularists because they have devalued secularism so that nobody listens to them.
Tell me that, you know, much of your writing and the things that you're engaged in the public domain are looking at societal aspirations, the aspiration for India. What aspiration, what personal aspiration do you have for yourself?
Well, I really feel I've kind of, I don't have any more real aspirations in the sense that I feel they're so linked up with the country that just to see the prosperity and the success of the country is quite enough, I mean, for me.
Gurcharan, thank you very much. That's a wonderful aspiration. Thank you very much indeed. This has been a great privilege.
Thanks.